I swear on everything I own, I never expected a garden gnome to ignite a full-scale suburban war. But here we are. My name's Daniel and I'm a pretty chill guy. I mow my lawn, I wave at neighbors, I return shopping carts. You could describe me as aggressively normal. My wife calls it boringly peaceful. And honestly, I take that as a compliment. We moved into this HOA-infested neighborhood last spring because the houses were cute, the streets were clean, and the brochure promised a harmonious community atmosphere. What they didn't mention was that the harmony was enforced by a woman who ruled the neighborhood like a medieval queen with a broken moral compass. Enter Karen, HOA president, neighborhood menace, and self-proclaimed guardian of standards. Now picture this. It's a bright Saturday morning. Birds are chirping, my daughter Lily is playing hopscotch, and I am proudly planting my brand new garden gnome, Gerald. Gerald wasn't offensive. He wasn't a political statement. He wasn't even neon. Just a little brown-hatted, smiling fella holding a tiny watering can. But apparently Gerald committed a crime against humanity, because not even 48 hours later, I get a letter taped to my door written in the kind of passive-aggressive cursive that screams, "I correct strangers' grammar for fun." It read, "Violation #0047B. Unauthorized figure placement. Gnomes are disruptive to the visual unity of our community. Remove immediately or be fined $150 per day." I actually laughed out loud. A gnome? Disruptive? Was Gerald planning a coup? But that laughter didn't last long, because this was only the beginning. I had no idea that this one ridiculous letter would snowball into fines, threats, fake security patrols, and eventually, a moment where my Navy SEAL brother would sprint into my driveway like an action movie hero. At the time, though, I just looked at Gerald, shrugged, and thought, let them try me. I removed the gnome for exactly 10 minutes. Why? Because I wanted to tape the violation letter to Gerald and pose him holding it like a protest sign. I thought it was hilarious. Lily thought it was the funniest thing in the whole solar system. My wife said, "You're provoking her," but also took pictures, so she's an accomplice. Well, the joke didn't land with everyone. Specifically, it didn't land with the HOA's new Community Compliance Patrol, which I discovered wasn't real, at least not legally. But at this point I didn't know that. I just saw two guys in navy blue polos with badges, plastic mind you, marching down the sidewalk like mall cops who failed mall cop school. They walked straight to my yard, took photos of Gerald holding the letter, and scribbled something on a clipboard dramatically. One of them pointed at my house like he was marking me for termination. That afternoon, I received a second letter. Violation escalation notice. Your recent attempt at mockery has been observed. Remove the gnome and refrain from antagonizing HOA officers. 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 The dude literally had a Velcro name tag. I confronted Karen. She was wearing a visor, a windbreaker, and the expression of someone who believes she was chosen by destiny to police mailboxes. I asked, "What exactly is a community compliance patrol?" She narrowed her eyes. "They ensure order." "Are they trained?" "Yes," she said proudly. "I trained them myself." This explained nothing and also made everything worse. That night I started documenting everything, dates, photos, videos, even my conversations. My wife rolled her eyes, but something in my gut said this was going to get ugly. Like reality TV reunion episode ugly. And I was right. If you've never experienced an HOA fine-nado, let me describe it. Imagine a tornado made of paper, rage, and arbitrary rules. It touches down on your residence, destroys your sanity, and leaves behind receipts. In the next week alone, I received 7 fines. 7. For what, you ask? Oh, buckle up. One fine was for grass inconsistencies. Another was for overly decorative holiday lighting, even though I had exactly one string of fairy lights on my fence. Another one was for parking my car with its rear end facing the street, which apparently disrupted the neighborhood's visual symmetry. My favorite one, and by favorite I mean the one that made me question whether I was being punked, was violation #0093F, play equipment noise. Children should play quietly to respect community tranquility. As in my daughter? Playing hopscotch? Laughing? Karen must have had binoculars glued to her skull. Naturally, I tried to protest. I attended an HOA meeting thinking it would be civil. Oh boy. The meeting was basically Karen sitting at a folding table like a queen on a cardboard throne. The moment I walked in, she loudly announced, "Ah, the gnome guy." The room chuckled. Except for me. I wasn't amused. I politely asked for clarification on the fines. Karen, waving her stack of clipboards, claimed I had created a pattern of community disturbances. I asked, "What disturbances?" She replied, "Your attitude." Apparently that was enough justification. After the meeting, a few neighbors approached me quietly. One whispered, "Just pay the fines. It's easier." Another muttered, "She fined me for my wind chimes. I'm scared of her." That's when I realized. This wasn't just a conflict. This was a dictatorship. And if nobody else wanted to push back, I guess I would have to. My wife calls it the night Daniel became a detective. I call it the night I scrolled a PDF until 3 a.m., fueled by spite and microwave lasagna. I broke open the HOA bylaws, which I had previously ignored because they looked like the kind of reading material that puts your brain into airplane mode. But this time I read with purpose. Each line felt like uncovering hidden treasure, except the treasure was all the ways Karen was illegally flexing HOA power. First discovery. The HOA is not allowed to issue fines without board approval. Yet every fine I received had only Karen's signature. Second discovery. The Community Compliance Patrol wasn't listed anywhere. No mention of uniforms, duties, authority, or Karen's homegrown cop academy. Third discovery. The HOA president cannot, and I repeat, cannot combine roles like treasurer, secretary, and compliance manager. Guess who had appointed herself to all three? But the biggest discovery of all? The HOA was legally required to hold elections every 2 years. And the last election on record was 8 years ago, meaning Karen had squatted on the throne like a dragon guarding gold that wasn't hers. Suddenly everything made sense. The fines, the threats, the patrol, the unhinged level of control. She wasn't just power-hungry. She was illegitimate. I compiled everything, screenshots, photos, timestamps, quotes, and more into a folder I titled Karen Combat Evidence Pack. When I told my wife, she blinked twice, then whispered the words every husband dreams of hearing. Get her. This wasn't a petty feud anymore. This was justice. Suburban justice. And I was ready. Up until this point, everything had been annoying, ridiculous, or mildly illegal. But then things shifted to dangerous. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I was working from home when I heard shouting outside. Not adult shouting, but kid shouting. I rushed out and found Lily sitting on the sidewalk holding her arm, crying. Standing over her were the 2 fake compliance patrol officers, looking like they'd been caught stealing cookies. What happened? I yelled. One of them stammered. As she was chalking the sidewalk. She fell, the other blurted out. Lily, sobbing, said, "He pushed me." My blood froze. She had been drawing flowers with chalk, sidewalk chalk, the harmless pastel kind every kid uses. But apparently, according to the officers, chalking was a defacement violation, and when she refused to stop, one grabbed her arm. Hard. I took one look at her swelling elbow and scooped her up. "Get away from my family," I growled. My voice didn't sound like mine. The officers backed up, muttering excuses. I was shaking, not with fear but with anger. I dialed 911 first. Then I dialed someone else. Someone who doesn't waste time. My brother Chris, former Navy SEAL. He answered on the first ring. I barely said, "They hurt Lily," before he cut in. Location. 3 minutes later, his truck screeched into my driveway. He didn't knock, didn't call out, didn't hesitate. He stormed past me like a heat-seeking missile locked on target. And that was the moment everything changed. Because SEALs do not tolerate threats. Especially not toward family. I swear the air temperature dropped when Chris stepped out of his truck. The man has presence, the kind that silences rooms and melts egos. He walked up to the 2 fake officers, who suddenly looked like they regretted every life choice that led them to this moment. "Which one touched her?" he asked, voice calm but deadly. Officer Velcro Badge squeaked. "Sir, we were just enforcing." Chris stepped closer. "Answer the question." The other one pointed at Velcro Badge. The man's knees visibly wobbled. Chris didn't touch him. He didn't shout. He just spoke in a low tone that carried more weight than shouting ever could. "You put your hands on a child." You impersonate law enforcement. If you're still standing here when the real cops arrive, you'll be leaving in handcuffs. They sprinted away. Literally ran. One tripped over Karen's decorative sunflower pot. The police arrived shortly after. We gave statements. They took everything very seriously, especially the impersonation part. Real cops do not like fake cops. When Lily was safely home with an ice pack and a promise of all the ice cream she wanted, my rage refocused. This wasn't just Karen's tyranny anymore. This was harm. This was dangerous. Chris crossed his arms and said, "You want this over? Then you hit them where it matters. Legally, publicly, and loudly." And that's when the plan formed. A glorious, beautifully petty plan. Karen wanted a war? Fine. She would get one. But mine would be lawful, documented, and devastating. I spent the next 2 days preparing like a student cramming for finals. Except instead of memorizing formulas, I was preparing to demolish a corrupt HOA president. Chris helped. By helped, I mean he sat beside me drinking coffee and occasionally saying things like, "That's illegal," or "That's really illegal," or "She is so screwed." I printed every violation letter, every photo, every timestamp. I included statements from neighbors who'd been fined for insane things. Wind chimes, bird feeders, porch pumpkins. One guy got fined for having too friendly a mailbox. Still not sure what that means. Then I assembled the piece de resistance. A spreadsheet comparing actual HOA bylaws with Karen's made-up rules. It was gorgeous. Color-coded, cross-referenced, footnoted. If spreadsheets had award shows, this one would win Best Drama. Next, I drafted a community email. This Saturday's HOA meeting concerned serious legal and ethical breaches by current leadership. Attendance highly recommended. No accusations. Just suspense. People love suspense. By Friday, Karen was already rattled. She left 3 voicemails saying I was creating unnecessary panic. I ignored everyone. Saturday arrived. People poured into the clubhouse like they were showing up for a free concert. The room buzzed with curiosity and mild rebellion. Karen sat stiffly at her folding table throne, looking like she was about to duel me. She opened the meeting with forced cheerfulness. "We will begin with routine announcements." "Actually," I said loudly, standing, "we need to address some violations." The room went silent. Karen's eyes narrowed into laser beams. It was time. Operation Expose the Tyrant had begun. Imagine the tension of a courtroom, the drama of a reality show, and the energy of a WWE match. That's how the HOA meeting felt. Every neighbor leaned forward like they had popcorn. Karen lifted her chin, trying to maintain dominance. "Daniel," she said icily, "HOA proceedings follow strict order. You can speak at the end." "No," I said, projecting like an annoyed kindergarten teacher. "We need to talk about your fake patrol, your illegal fines, and your 8 years without an election." A collective "oh" rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Get her." Karen sputtered. "These accusations are baseless." I lifted a binder thick enough to be considered a weapon. "This binder is 186 pages. None of it is baseless." I handed copies to the board members. They flipped through with widening eyes. "I'd like to start," I continued, "with the fact that your so-called community compliance patrol isn't authorized by any bylaw. Also, you cannot fine residents without board approval. Also," I turned a page for dramatic effect, "you cannot hold every leadership position at once." Karen's face shifted from red to purple. I had to fill the roles. No one else volunteered. Someone from the back yelled, "Maybe because you scared everyone off." I proceeded calmly, presenting proof after proof. Screenshots, photos, testimonies, audio. Even a side-by-side comparison of the real bylaws versus Karen's rewritten versions. The board members exchanged looks. One finally said, "This is extremely concerning." Karen slammed her hand on the table. "This is a smear campaign." "And what about the fake officers who injured my daughter?" I asked. Silence. Gasps. A neighbor whispered, "She hired those clowns?" The momentum had shifted. And Karen knew it. Karen's meltdown was legendary. Truly historic. The kind of meltdown bards would sing about if bards sang about suburban HOA disasters. When I mentioned Lily's injury, the room erupted with questions. Is she okay? Who touched her? Did the HOA hire them? Karen, sweating profusely, waved her arms. Those men were volunteers. I can't be blamed for their actions. Volunteers who you gave badges, I said. Volunteers you called officers. Volunteers you trained. She shrieked. This is defamation. Chris, who was standing in the back with his arms crossed like a final boss, calmly said. I have video. The room gasped. Karen looked like someone had unplugged her soul. At that moment, the vice president, who apparently did nothing for 8 years except sit quietly in meetings, finally found his spine. He stood up and said, We need to vote on emergency leadership suspension. Karen screeched. You can't do that. The treasurer spoke up. Actually, we can. Page 14. I knew that page well. I had slept with that bylaws PDF. Figuratively. Mostly. Karen tried one last Hail Mary. She pointed at me and yelled. He has a gnome. A gnome. The entire room burst into laughter. Even the treasurer snorted. And that was it. The moment her reign cracked. A board member motioned for a vote. Hands went up everywhere. Even her loyal minions hesitated before raising their hands awkwardly. Karen screamed, Traitors! And stormed out, knocking over a pot of artificial daisies as she went. The neighborhood had spoken. And the tyrant had fallen. With Karen suspended pending investigation, the neighborhood let out a collective exhale. Suddenly, people weren't afraid to put wind chimes outside. Kids played louder. Someone put a flamingo in their yard and nobody died. The world kept spinning. The board held an emergency election the following week. Shockingly, with actual ballots and transparency, concepts Karen apparently thought were mythical. I didn't run. I had no interest in ruling the cul-de-sac. But 3 neighbors volunteered. And the difference was immediate. The first act of the new board? Abolish or revise any rule made solely by Karen. The second act? Ban badges. Forever. No exceptions. The third? Issue a formal apology to my family, especially Lily. We accepted. Meanwhile, the police followed up on the fake officers. Turns out impersonating authority is a very big deal. Charges were filed. Neighbors who had lived in silent fear for years started sharing stories. Ridiculous fines, threats, humiliations. It was like group therapy. But therapeutic or not, the HOA was finally becoming what it should have been all along. A normal, mildly annoying organization instead of a suburban monarchy controlled by a visor-wearing tyrant. As for Gerald the gnome, he became a local celebrity. Someone even crocheted him a tiny survivor sash. Life was returning to normal. Quiet. Peaceful. Which is exactly how I like it. But there were still 2 chapters left in this saga. Because Karen, she wasn't done yet. Karen's final attempt at reclaiming power arrived in the form of a Facebook post so dramatic, so unhinged, so poorly punctuated that it deserved to be framed. It read, The community has been taken over by criminals and gnome worshippers. Democracy has collapsed. I will return. We laughed for 3 days. But then she tried something more serious. She filed a complaint claiming I incited a mob and emotionally destabilized the community. The board dismissed it instantly, but she wasn't ready to give up. She attempted to host her own emergency meeting in her driveway, complete with folding chairs and a megaphone. 3 people showed up. One was her cat. When she spotted Chris walking by, she panicked and ran inside, slamming the door while yelling, I will not be intimidated by naval force. This woman genuinely believed my brother, who once wrestled a crocodile, long story, cared enough about her to use naval force. Eventually, after several more complaints, a lawyer letter from the HOA, and the realization that half the neighborhood had blocked her on Facebook, she moved out. Quietly. At night. Like a suburban villain retreating into the shadows. Rumor has it she tried to start an HOA in a neighborhood without an HOA. I believe it. Her departure marked the true end of the era. The neighborhood breathed easier. Kids laughed louder. Decorations flourished. And chaos ended. But the story doesn't end until you know what happened next, with us, with Lily, with the community, and of course with Gerald. Life after Karen felt like life after a hurricane. Calm, warm, weirdly bright. People began talking to each other again. Not whispering, not complaining, actually talking. A neighbor brought us cookies. Another installed a mini free library. Someone even put up holiday lights in October and nobody got a citation. Progress. The new HOA board made sweeping changes. A fines now required majority approval. A ridiculous rules were removed. Elections were set in stone. No more volunteer enforcement squads. Thank God. As for Lily, her arm healed quickly. She now uses chalk like it's a badge of honor, drawing giant flowers labeled, "No HOA cops allowed." The neighborhood kids love it. Chris visited often after the incident, probably to make sure we didn't get ambushed by any more fake patrols. He also bought Lily a massive set of chalk. He claims it was for her, but I think it was also a warning to future tyrants. And Gerald? Oh, Gerald thrived. The neighborhood built a tiny wooden gnome sanctuary for him. He is now the unofficial mascot of our freedom. People salute him. Someone knit him a winter scarf. I swear he looks happier. As for me, I learned something important. A peaceful man can become a warrior when pushed. A petty man can become unstoppable when motivated. And a dad? A dad will document everything, print it in color, and dismantle your corrupt HOA career in front of 30 neighbors if you mess with his daughter. This is my mountain now. And no fake cop, no visor-wearing tyrant, no gnome-hating dictator will ever change that. The end. Justice served, gnome protected, peace restored.